I'm Craig Violante. I'm going to talk for about 4 hours here, so hope you have that blocked off on your time. No, just kidding, of course. Little bit about KCHA. We are indeed the public housing provider in the greater Seattle area. We cover all of King County except for the city of Seattle. They have their own housing authority, and a smaller city south, Renton. We've got about 156 properties that we own or manage. We have about 300 different funds. We have multiple funding sources, 15 departments, many construction projects. So we have a fairly diverse need of budgeting and reporting. We used to use only Excel, and we used to be one of those people that we would do basically cut and paste into Excel. And Spreadsheet Server has allowed us to really bypass that and become a lot more proactive in what we do. For us personally, it's been a godsend. We use a product called Unit4 Business World as our main software provider for finances. And it has a feature which is similar to what you're going to be seeing in Global Software, where we can pull data and it puts it into a spreadsheet, and it's a number. You can't do anything with the number. It's just a single number that there's no drill down capabilities. And within the system, we can also write reports that do drill down, but neither of those really were meeting our needs for where we needed to go. And when we first saw Spreadsheet Server, we knew right away that it was going to sort of bridge what the limitations of what we currently had. So if we can go to the next slide. So we use Spreadsheet Server kind of in a couple huge ways. One is we use it for reporting, both internally and externally, but just as important, or maybe more important to me, we use it for analytical purposes as well. And it's probably a little smaller than I wish it had been, but this is just a little snapshot of a much larger analytical tool that we have. So I mentioned we've got 156 properties. This is just 3 properties in that group. And what this does is it basically is a little reconciliation of our starting cash at the beginning of a period and the ending cash. So it's a little mini cash flow statement. And what's so important to us is that we can do research and analysis on the fly. So we can look at something and we can say, wow, I'm looking at Carriage House, our property number 210, and wow, there's $400,000 of casualty loss. What is that? In the old system, it would just be a number. We'd have to go log into our main system, drill down, find it, figure out what it is. With this system, and you'll see this in a bit, not with our data, but you'll see with Global Software's data, we can actually just double-click on it, see the detail accounts that go into that, drill down further into transactional detail, and drill down further and actually look at anything that we've scanned in. So it could be an invoice or whatever it is. It can save us just enormous amounts of time. So this is an example of the kind of savings where looking at something like this and trying to understand, you know, for 156 properties, why we're seeing some of the stuff we're seeing, well, would take days. And while it still takes a long time because we have 156 properties, this is an example of a report that has probably saved us at least 70% of the time. You know, just creating the report, a flat report, is what we used to be able to do. But being able to explain why are we seeing what we're seeing, what does this mean to us, what sort of managerial action can we take on something, that's really the benefit that we get out of Global Software. You know, I can sit down with people and we can discuss it. I can call them on the phone, they can get the same data, and we can go over line by line and understand why we're seeing, we can understand why we're seeing what we're seeing. To create something like this is actually really not all that complicated either. There certainly is some learning that goes on. If we could go to the next slide. So this is just, I tried to just show kind of the criteria that as somebody builds it. And you're going to be actually learning a lot more about this from the experts in it. But what I'm trying to show here is we have, we're fairly complicated. We have 8 different reporting segments in our general ledger. And the real key here is that you can write your reports to pull data for us, for any of our 8 segments in virtually any way that we want. So we can choose the first segment we call our account string. It's our major account. And we can write these reports so that we can summarize it in any way we want. So you can see some of those over on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see that we've taken the first 3 digits of several accounts, and so what you're seeing there's the definition. It'll take the total of, well, in one case, the total of anything that has a 40 to begin, and then 401, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next one over, we exclude Department 70. We include certain funds. An asterisk means that it's just wild card. It takes anything. But as you can see, you can really, really drill down and define these reports however you want. And that's been that's been so key to us to be able to do that, to try to replicate this in any sort of other report is really quite challenging for us. Let's say in our old version, we could do this in our old reporting, but again, it was just a flat file. You know, it would just show up a number. You had no idea really what went into it. And this is just really what has saved us so much time. So in this case, we can much more quickly understand why do we have a change in cash on a particular property. And then more importantly for us, of course, is how do we deploy that cash? We could deploy it within a property. We could use it for other purposes. So that's one example of a report that is really, we use almost solely for analytical purposes. If we go to the next slide, this is more of a sort of a hybrid regulatory internal reporting to the board report. We have cash, of course, that we manage. This is just, again, just a snapshot of a larger report. But it's important to us that we manage cash in 4 different buckets. Being a housing authority, we are highly regulated, and we're regulated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And different cash we have carries different flavors of how we can utilize it. So, for example, our unrestricted cash, it's unrestricted literally in the GAAP definition of cash. It's not listed on here. We have a couple other categories that I hid. We have one that we call a category that's unrestricted, but has to be used in the program. So, for example, we'll have some cash in our public housing program. We say it's unrestricted from a GAAP standpoint, but must be used in the public housing program. We have another category that we call designated. Again, you can't see it on here, but that's cash that either the board has decided to set aside for some reason, or staff has decided to set it aside. As you finance people out there know, even a board setting it aside does not amount to a GAAP restriction, but it's still not cash that is considered available for general use. So we set it aside, call it designated. We give it, we account for it separately. And then finally, we do see at the bottom there, in the middle part actually, is cash that is restricted cash, that which is actually restricted by an outside entity or contractual. So to accomplish this in our system, one of our account string segments is for restriction type. We have 4, and so things in our unrestricted cash accounts, they carry out a code of 1. Those in, for example, designated is a type 3, restricted is a type 4. When we have cash accounts that are either designated or restricted, we also want to track specifically what is it set aside for, or what is the restriction. And so you can see in the list beneath, the $67 million of restricted, we list out then above exactly what those accounts are. So in the old system, again, we would know that we had $67 million of restricted cash, but it would take us, it would take probably an hour to go through and figure out what actually is making this up. This allows us just instantly to see what it is. So if you go to the next slide, please, you can see how we defined it. So as I mentioned, you'll see there's a bunch of 4s in the kind of the left side of the screen. That's indicating that what it's drawing is accounts with restriction type 4. And then kind of in the middle, you'll see 400, 401, 402. That's drawing from what we call our sixth segment. We call it funding source. We use it for things besides strictly a funding source. Yeah, right there. And that is how we define what we set the money aside for. So, the biggest number there, you look, we have $45 million here in restricted cash. The old way might have said, what? Well, I could now just drill down easily into the data and see what that is. Now, I just happen to know that we issued some bonds at the very end of 2017 for a rehabilitation project that we're doing. We're going to be spending it in 2018, but it's restricted for this rehabilitation project. Other people may not necessarily know that, so they'd be able to just click on it, drill down, and say, oh, that's right, it's these 2 projects. And probably one of the other perfect example of that is a couple down from there. You see there's about $6.251 million replacement reserve. A replacement reserve is money that's set aside for future capital projects. We'll set aside maybe $300 per unit per year, and we use it in the future for things like replacing roofs or siding or things like that. And so in the old system, again, we'd know that we had $6 million, but we'd have no idea, without a lot of research, going into the other system and creating a report and running it, of which properties that relates to. Well, here we can just click on that $6 million number, and boom, up pops the detail of what makes that up. So this is really why we have transitioned virtually all of our reporting over to Spreadsheet Server. Of our 156 properties, we have property managers who are responsible for multiple properties. We can different reports here, I'm not going to show it, but we have site reports that shows monthly the operations. And it used to take our financial reporting staff probably a couple days to go through and create them and look at them and then have to email out separately and blah, blah, blah. And this is now, there's a feature in Global Software where you can preset it up, and with the click of the button, it'll just distribute all of these reports out to the various property managers for the properties they're responsible for. That has probably saved them probably even more than 75%. It probably saves them 90% of the time for what it used to take. So that's really kind of a very brief overview of how we are using it.